Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you are doing well. We have Ricardo Green, our solutions architect here at Fugue, who's going to walk through a demonstration of using Fugue. Fugue puts engineers in command of cloud security and compliance. First, I want to point people to a few additional resources that we have available to you. I think my colleague Sivia will post some links to these in the chat. First is our Cloud Security Masterclass series. These are deep technical dives into various cloud security topics, from S3 to IAM to thinking like a hacker to cloud misconfiguration exploit simulations. You can check those out at fugue.co/masterclass. We also have our recent Engineer's Handbook on Cloud Security. This is full of insights and actionable information that you can use to better secure your cloud. So go ahead and download that PDF at fugue.co/handbook. Finally, Ricardo and I have been hosting Fugue office hours. These are live streams on YouTube where Ricardo walks through specific jobs that you can get done with Fugue. We have a playlist available that you can check out some of the recent ones we've done, and we about every 2 weeks or so put a new session up, a live session. So, all right, chat is now open at any time during the session. If you have any questions or comments, please do pop those into the chat. But also, if you want to remain anonymous, you can reach out to us directly or use the Q&A feature in Zoom to ask us any questions that you have, and we'll avoid using your name in that kind of circumstance. So otherwise, let's get on with this. Hey, Ricardo, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome.
So we will go ahead and get started. So hopefully you are seeing my screen. You should have that slide up.
Yep.
And just kind of a heads up, these sessions are really designed for folks that don't have any experience with Fugue. Obviously, if you have seen Fugue demos before, we welcome you back and thank you for stopping by again. But really focusing these sessions for folks that aren't too familiar with Fugue, curious to know what the capabilities are for the platform. So that's really how this is designed. So we won't go too deep into some of the other technical aspects of Fugue, but we do encourage you to ask those questions. So if there are areas of interest in terms of capabilities that you want me to talk about or Drew to ask me about, please don't hesitate to reach out to us through chat. I do have really just a single slide that I want to touch on, and that's here. So we really want to kind of level set of the perspective, how we see things at Fugue when you're thinking about managing your infrastructure, managing security and compliance in the cloud. So this is our visual of climbing the cloud security mountain. You'll see there are 3 base camps and then a summit. We tend to find our customers are heavily focused in base camp 1, the discovery and posture reporting. And so that's where we really spend most of the time, especially for this session, is in that base camp. That's really where you're going to get a grasp of what you have running in the cloud, what resources are there, understanding their connected relationships, understanding how you stack up to some of the popular compliance frameworks. So doing that evaluation and being able to report on it. And that's where we find that roughly 90% of our customers are in. That's not to say that we don't have customers that have ascended to these other base camps, but it generally is getting a grasp or a handle of base camp 1. When we get into base camp 2, which we'll actually touch on in the demonstration, that's when we start to understand the configuration changes. So we start getting reporting, logging configuration changes, understanding drift, when it occurs, why it occurs, those sorts of things. So we're tracking those policy violations, where we're actually setting up lists so that we can start manually remediating misconfigurations and assets that are out of compliance. When we go into Basecamp 3, that's when we start thinking about shifting left. So now we're starting to get information earlier in the software development lifecycle. So we're starting to use infrastructure as code. We're evaluating those plans pre-deployment. We're automating a lot of that activity, automating getting that feedback and being able to automate specific tasks that you would perform in Fugue, and doing that through our pipelines. And then ultimately the summit is really when you have a grasp of automation, you're starting to automate a lot of the regular interactions that you might have with Fugue or a security tool. You're looking to find areas within your environments where you can actually do some automated remediation to actually enforce activities, to where you may have security groups that you don't want changing. You can do set up Fugue to do auto remediation. And that's where we see when customers are starting to automate those practices. So really you've incorporated everything through the 3 base camps, and you're even automating some of the remediation efforts. And so that's the view of Fugue climbing the security mountain. We're really gonna, again, like I said, focus on Basecamp 1. I'm gonna stop sharing here and switch screens and reshare again. So bear with me one moment. And resharing now. So if Drew or Sivia could confirm that you are seeing my screen.
It looks great.
Looks perfect.
So this is your dashboard. So the Fugue dashboard is where you will house all of your accounts or environments. So for the purposes of kind of the Fugue dashboard, when we say environments, it's really the way that you've configured your different accounts. And that can be an account in its entirety. It can be a subsection of certain accounts or certain regions. So we'll walk through that. So we'll take the top-down approach to kind of look at getting started, or actually I should say a bottom-up approach. How do we get started? And then as we start moving through the different tasks and things to do within Fugue. So in terms of connecting to Fugue, it is a multi-cloud solution. So AWS and Azure today, we will be adding GCP most likely in Q1 of 2021. In terms of the setup, we'll go through just the really quick process of setting up. So simply name your environment. Again, when I say environment, it is, you have the ability to really customize how you're doing it. And there are a number of different use cases. But so for the sake of this, you can include all of the commercial regions, or you can decide to pick a subset of the commercial regions in your environment setup. In terms of the resource types, you will see a number of resource types that Fugue has the ability to inspect and to collect configuration information on. All of those resources are here. You can see that Fugue is extremely deep in the resources and that we actually will help you manage and understand configuration elements on as I scroll through that. We also have a recommended list, and we'll just proceed with that recommended list. And you can see that here is roughly about 141 resource types. These are the resources that are most impacted by security and compliance within the AWS cloud environments. Once we select that, our next section takes us to defining the IAM role, which will allow Fugue to inspect the resources and to compute against the compliance family. So if we take a look at the template, we'll see a number of different things. So this would be what you would actually launch in your AWS environment. This is an example. This can be cut and pasted. We also have a simple easy button, so to speak, where you can just click. This cloud formation template will be launched in your AWS console so that you can deploy it. A couple of key things to note. There is an assume role. This is the Fugue account. So there is an assume role action there. You also see an external ID, and this is something that each customer has a unique external ID. This is an AWS best practice. You'll also see in the role definition that we are primarily using this managed policy. So it's a security audit read-only policy. There are a number of things that we inspect that actually aren't covered under that, and that's where you'll see these inline policies. closer inspection of these, you'll see that they're just describe and list calls. So it's just a matter of being able to gather the information to understand these resource configurations and compute against them. Pretty straightforward in terms of the setup there. Going back, we'll talk a little bit about how we would do that on Azure. So a very similar process in that you select, you name your environment, you select Azure. Azure is going to ask you for 4 specific pieces of information. So your subscription ID is one, the tenant ID is the other one. You will create an application within the Azure portal. With that application comes an application ID. So you will need to input that there. And then you want to generate a secret. And so there's an application secret. We list it as client secret here. That has to be input there. So once you do that, once all of these elements are there, we click connect to Azure. Fugue then confirms that we can have that connection is established. In terms of the permissions that app has, you will just give that application reader permission. So that's kind of the base level of reader permission, which will allow the Fugue application to inspect the resources in your Azure environment. Once you connect, you will get a list of resource groups. So in a differentiated manner, we are not looking at specific resource types to select from. We're looking at the resource groups that you've created in Azure, and then you can inspect all of those resource groups in a single environment. So you can cover that entire subscription. For the purposes of this demonstration, we're actually just going to be using AWS. We probably will be doing some of these additional public demonstrations, which look deeper at Azure. But for the sake of this time, we're going to be focused on AWS. So once we have that connection, once we've established that, we will have a list of our environments. So again, the environment naming convention is up to you as the customer. You determine how you want to name the environments. It can be based on the account, type of environment, whether it's production or otherwise. You have complete flexibility there. Once we get everything set up, we can then look at the visual representation of the environment. While that's coming up, you also, as part of that setup, will decide what are the most important compliance families that you want to evaluate. So Fugue out of the box, and this is without you doing anything, Fugue has created mappings for all of these compliance families. So CIS benchmarks, GDPR, HIPAA, NIST, PCI, SOC 2, ISO 27001, and you'll see CIS controls as well here. Fugue Best Practices is a library that Fugue developed, which is a number of checks that are really cloud native checks. We, as obviously a security and compliance company, have studied recent cloud breaches, understanding what certain checks or configurations have been exploited, how we can alert customers to those vulnerabilities. And that's what Fugue Best Practices are. So you will look through your Fugue Best Practices, find non-compliant configurations, and obviously pay attention to those and want to fix those. And those are also checks that don't appear in any of these other compliance families. So you definitely want to have that turned on. You'll also see custom rules here. So custom rules is Fugue's ability to, or I should say Fugue's implementation of giving you the ability to create your own checks. And these checks can be related to corporate governance. They could be additional security policies for resources that aren't under the compliance families. As we know, the compliance families don't cover every AWS or Azure resource. So you could have a customized security check for specific resource type that may not be checked in some of the other compliance families. There really is hundreds, if not thousands, of different options that you could create in your custom rules section. So we use Open Policy Agent, which is an open source policy engine, and that is how it's implemented. So you can actually interact with your own custom rules via the UI. You also have API access. So if you want to do things programmatically, that is available to you as well. And I will show you an example of that before this demonstration is done. Once you have done, once you've done your connections, you've decided the compliance families. In this case, I have everything checked. you will then be taken to a visualization. So there's a visualizer tab. Within the visualization, what you see is all of the connected relationships that exist within that account. So in this case, I have set up for 4 regions. So US East 1 and 2, US West 1 and 2. I can decide to show the compliance errors or not show the compliance errors. Clicking show compliance errors will just draw anything that's evaluated that is non-compliant against any of these frameworks will come up in red as to draw my attention to those. You also have the ability to expand the grouping. So expanding the groupings, essentially, if you have multiple resources of a certain type, so multiple S3 buckets, they will be condensed into a collection. Expanding the resources simply expands that collection so you can see each individual resource. The visualizer also has the effect of the more you zoom in, the more detail you'll get. So as we focus on this specific region, we can see all of these different connected relationships within the resources in this region. Customers often use this, one of the initial use cases is just as a discovery tool to see what is where, to draw your attention to configurations that probably shouldn't be there. This is an example of one such configuration that violates a number of different compliance frameworks, but it's essentially an EC2 instance that has direct connectivity to the internet. You generally want to have that behind a load balancer or an auto scaling group, something that is, or a web application firewall, something that is going to keep folks from being able to directly access that. We also have cases where customers will look at default VPCs. And the hope is that you've either deleted the default VPC or that you are just not deploying resources in that default VPC because by default, it is non-compliant and non-secure. So customers are able to see what's deployed where, what they have out there. As I mentioned, we zoom in even more, we're directed to those specific areas. So if we look at this VPC specifically, we now see all of the subnets and security groups that are associated with it. Our attention is drawn to this specific security group, which is non-compliant. These instances have some level of non-compliance. And we're also able to click into each one of these elements. So clicking into the load balancer, we get additional details about that load balancer configuration. And this is really something that's important to note. Fugue captures all of the configuration details of these elements. So as I scroll down, we can see subnets that are behind this load balancer, the network that's associated with it, the security group. Each one of the instance, I can hover over here, and you'll also see that a blue square goes around each one of these Fugue demo instances that are a part of that auto scaling group. Tagging details are collected and all of the attributes associated with that load balancer. So when we talk about other use cases of baselining, which is essentially Fugue taking a snapshot of resource configurations, this is the capture of everything that we're looking for. So all of these resource configurations, when there is a change, that is when true drift is acknowledged. And that's when Fugue sees the change in those attributes. So it deviates from how alerts are in, what we might call a Gen 1 or a traditional sense of tools that are using rule engines, because it's using a rule that is being violated, not necessarily a configuration change. And sometimes those rules are evaluated incorrectly. Fugue is capturing true change. So when there is a change in configuration attributes, that's when you're going to get a drift alert. In terms of compliance, so all of these elements have a compliance notification to let us know that something has violated. You see an explanation, so details as to why that specific resource is non-compliant. You will see the controls that failed. So there's a specificity in terms of the compliance families and the frameworks. So all of that mapping is done for you. So if you're going down a list of CIS controls and checking it against your cloud environments, you're able to see which ones of those controls have been violated by these non-compliant evaluations. And again, I will stress that this is just for the resources that you're visualizing. So this is from a visual perspective. Somebody that's in charge of a network perimeter or something may want to see things from this view, because obviously this is going to give you a picture of what's drawn out, what's configured, what's connected to what. Highly important. This is also something that if you wanted to, you could export. So this is exportable in picture format. The last thing I'll draw your attention to here is all of these visualizations. So anytime Fugue performs a scan, it is captured and you can refer to it at any time. So as long as this environment has been active, I could roll back at any time to see what the configurations were. If I needed to take a picture or kind of see what the visual differentiation is, I could do that as well. And the other thing, you can always do searches. So whether it's looking for a specific resource, looking for a specific resource type. If I want, all of my S3 buckets to appear in a list, I can simply type S3 as I do the search. Everything with S3 associated with it or in it is going to be here. So a lot of value gleaned from just this visual perspective. And this is kind of just the front end of Fugue. So I will pause there on the visualizer topic. Drew, let me know if there are any questions pertaining to the visualizer, and I can address those. If not, I'll move on to the complete compliance evaluation view.
Hey, Ricardo, thank you. I'm not Drew, but there are some questions. A question about what our Google Cloud Platform support is going to look like in the future, or when. Do we have any dates? I thought I heard Q1, Q2, but
yeah, Q1 of 20. What year is this?
2021.
Oh my gosh, yeah, Q1 of 2021 is the plan. There is actually no difference in the way that you will see things. So the visualizer will work in the same manner. The way that resources are defined, so kind of the naming conventions are going to change, because obviously they don't have DynamoDB tables. But whatever the kind of the Google name for their NoSQL database will be in there. I can actually show a quick example of how it is for Azure. So you can see a very similar sort of visualization here with Azure, and based on the way that Azure names their storage, their storage accounts. They're also clicking around here a little bit. Databases, the way the databases are, the way that Azure does their apps. So they're defined a little bit differently. But yeah, so it'll follow that same suit. One of the, and I won't call it a delay, but so one of the time consuming elements is some of the resource evaluation. So the configuration elements and being defined with all of these compliance families. So as you can see, we've done this with Azure. It's just a matter of time to do that with Google. We do have a beta instance of Fugue running in Google. It's just not publicly available. It's obviously for development for us, but it is, the exact same product, same features and functionality will be available in GCP as well.
Thank you, Ricardo. We have another question. Is how does it, and I'm assuming that means Fugue, evaluate compliance with different controls? NIST has about 900 controls, but an organization may be tracking what is relevant to them. How does it tackle this scenario?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And it really will take me out. I'm gonna see if there's, yes. So in this particular environment, we are looking at the NIST framework. So this will take me directly to that question, and I'll actually go through it actually in the context of explaining some of the control evaluations that are done. But in a nutshell, Fugue is only going to interrogate those controls which are impacted by your cloud computing infrastructure. So the person that asked the question, you are absolutely right. And I actually think there's probably over 1,000 different things that can be checked. We are only checking things that have to do with cloud computing infrastructure evaluation. So when we scroll down and we look at kind of this controls overview, there are roughly 23 compliant controls. Now that's just the controls themselves. the resources that are impacted by those controls are far greater, and you will see those in the individual compliance evaluation. So if I filter this out by NIST, and then we look at all the different controls, on the non-compliant side, you will see the number of resources that are impacted. And generally speaking, there's more than one resource that's going to be impacted by a control. Fugue takes a really broad approach. So the simple example that I seem to mention all the time has to do with encryption at rest. So any area of your public cloud infrastructure that holds data at rest and has the option to have encryption at rest, which pretty much everything does now, we will evaluate that. So we're going to evaluate your tables, your DynamoDB tables, your RDS databases, your S3 buckets, your EBS volumes, your Elastic file store, everything that can hold data at rest is going to be evaluated. So if a single element is non-compliant, then that renders the entire control non-compliant. And this area is where you're actually going to see that information, where that evaluation actually happens, and you'll be drawn to those specific resources. So this is a compliance by control view. And hopefully I answered that question. So I didn't want I think I answered it. I'm kind of just going deeper into it. But please chime in on the chat if I haven't for some reason.
Yeah, Ricardo, I guess waivers might be the other factor there too.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm going to touch on that as well. So that's good to bring up. But this is an example. So 800-53 AC 17 section 2 is essentially looking at security group rules, also a listener source protocol. So there's some overlap in terms of what that rule evaluation is. And we're very, anybody that deals with compliance, and I'm not a compliance expert by any stretch, there's some broad interpretations and pretty vague. So we actually err on the side of caution and really will probably broadly interpret a lot of these things to impact more resources than customers may feel are necessary. And we certainly want that sort of feedback from customers if they have issues with it, or if there's an issue. What Drew mentioned is the way that you can impact that. So as we look at this, we see that there are a number of non-compliant evaluations based on this. So we get all of these different resource IDs, primarily security groups, and we also see that our load balancer is impacted. This view is going to give me everything by control. So I can look at each one of the controls that are being evaluated in that framework, again, as it relates to the public cloud infrastructure, and see what these evaluations are and which resources are non-compliant. So looking at it by another view, which is a compliance by resource view, we'll also look at the security groups. So in this situation, we're looking at the EC2.security group. We see all of those security groups, and I think what we had pulled up was US West 2. So we'll just pull up the security groups in US West 2. So we then can now look at each one of the individual assets. So each one of the individual security groups, we see the resource ID. I can look at this security group and I can see what's being evaluated. So I can view these evaluations and I can make a determination that this security group is not part of my production environment. This is not part of the framework that we're following. So I want to waive it or bypass that evaluation for this security group. So we could see that this has the severity levels that are associated with some of these rules. Obviously, if it has to do with kind of your endpoint or edge security, it's going to be high, but I can waive that. So I can decide that this specific rule, which doesn't permit port 80 to the world, I can decide that I'm not concerned with that. And if this is a non-production environment, it does not have to be secure. I don't need it evaluated. I don't need reporting on it. I can decide to waive it. And this is how you would effectively do that. So you can do it for that specific environment. You can waive all of the affected resources. So for that specific evaluation. So, and then you will have a log of the creation of the waivers, who created it, when it was last updated. All of that information would be available to you as well. So the other view that we have here is just looking at compliance by resource type. So again, based on your role within the organization, You may be solely concerned with, again, kind of the edge security. So maybe looking at your VPC, subnets, security groups, route tables, and your network ACL. So you can look at all of these different elements to see what's compliant, what's non-compliant, and then be able to take a tighter view of those. So we can look at the VPCs to see which ones are compliant or non-compliant evaluations, get reasons why they are non-compliant. And as you can see, there's tremendous overlap in a lot of these evaluations for the different control families. So it does get a little convoluted when you have multiple control frameworks that you're trying to adhere to. But for informational purposes, it's always good to know and understand, again, referring to like Basecamp level 1, knowing what your posture is. How could we achieve certain levels of certification if we needed to prove it to customers or auditors or internal folks as well, whether it's executives or whoever you needed to report it to. That information in detail is available to you.
Ricardo, I have a
Yes.
couple of other questions for
Sure.
you. Some good ones. An anonymous attendee asks, can we use the scan report as evidence for SOC 2 audit compliance?
Yes. So I guess I could say, I mean, we use Fugue on Fugue. So we run this against our own environments for these evaluations. We share this information with folks that are auditing our environments. So you absolutely can. We have a number of, I think they're public use cases where customers, we've actually gotten customers where customers have used Fugue to evaluate whatever compliance family that they are being audited against during their trial period. And thus, I obviously contracted with Fugue and around customers of ours just because the information was extremely valuable. So yes, SOC 2 is there. I don't know in terms of like what your auditor accepts as evidence. What's really nice about Fugue, though, in thinking about it from this perspective, is that this is also information that could be shared. So Fugue has full role-based access controls. So you could actually give access to specific environments to others outside of your organization with restricted access based on what you decide. So that level of organization and role-based access controls is available as well. But absolutely, I mean, the goal of Fugue is to provide you as much information as necessary so that you can do those evaluations and be able to report on that information. So you'll see, all of the different controls within the SOC 2 framework that are affected by your by the public cloud infrastructure and the infrastructure resources. So absolutely. Additionally, all of the detail that the evaluations is exportable. And API accessible. So you absolutely could use that information.
Thank you, Ricardo. I do have a question from Denise. Denise asks, does Fugue have built-in help features to utilize while you're working?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but I'll tell you, in terms of, go ahead, Drew, you were saying something?
I was just going to chime in. I sort of read that kind of as a shift left, like as you're developing infrastructure. Now I could be wrong, and then maybe it's just help features in just using the Fugue product. But maybe Denise, if you can let us know if you were talking about kind of help features with using the Fugue product. She did have a follow-up about best practices on how to use Fugue as well.
Perfect. So this kind of lends me to our documentation. So and I'll mention it now. So Fugue developer, so anybody that goes to the Fugue site, there's a try it free button there. Fugue developer is free forever. So the restrictions are based on the compliance family evaluations, the number of resources that you're interrogating, and really designed for a single user experience. And really the hope is our goal as an organization is to provide a tool where individual engineers and developers who are deploying infrastructure and interacting with cloud environments have the ability to know how secure whatever they're deploying, what they have out there, to get an idea of how secure it is. So, and that's kind of like the basic level. We want that information out there. Obviously, we want everybody to protect themselves. So that's free forever, Fugue developer. As you decide to adopt it, maybe as an enterprise, then you'll get into some additional use cases and need additional features, which require licensing. But from a getting started standpoint, the Fugue documentation will walk you through everything that you need getting started. I believe we have some other videos on our YouTube channel that can assist you with that. In terms of kind of the help feature, and I'm going to answer it this way, help in fixing and bringing your resources into compliance is also provided here. So every evaluation that Fugue performs for all of the compliance frameworks, so every compliance framework that we have, every evaluation that we do, we actually tell you what you would need to do to bring it into compliance. We not only give you detail and instructions on bringing it into compliance using the AWS console or the Azure portal, we tell you how you can do it programmatically using the CLI. So there is a ton of information that's here. And as I scroll through it, these are all the different compliance evaluations or evaluations that are done that would evaluate to non-compliant and how you would fix everything. So that information is there. We also obviously have support. We have a public Slack channel. So we are absolutely here to help you. So hopefully that's kind of what you meant by help. But getting started, we also provide sessions where we work through you for a guided trial experience. And in many cases, I'm working with customers one-on-one to get them set up and to really start to operationalize the information that Fugue is providing in those sorts of checks.
Yep, and there was one follow-up for clarity about help writing custom rules so that you know what each rule means.
Yeah, absolutely. So this takes me to our, this is an open repository, so this is public. Here we have examples of custom rules that customers can view and adopt. Redirected where I didn't want to redirect to. So if you look at some of the simple custom rules, these are rules that you can actually take the rule definition, the information, the code that's in here, and plug that directly into our UI. And I'll show you where you would do that. But this is an example of a custom rule that's looking at specific machine images. So obviously this is not something that is compliance related. But if your company establishes, say, hardened machined images, which are allowed use in your production environments or for deployment, you can always update this list, and Fugue will inspect to make sure that whatever appears here is the machine image that has been deployed. And if it's not, it'll render it non-compliant. But you'll see, and I have an example of that same custom rule that I have here, where I'm looking at the approved machine images. So the same rule language that we have, that you would have in your repo, you can actually sync that directly with Fugue for input here. So this, you can write your rule directly into the Fugue UI. We have details a lot in our documentation about writing custom rules. We also have details with Open Policy Agent to get you familiar with the Rego language. We've written hundreds of these rules. So many of our customers say, hey, we've got these 5 rules that we want to implement, and we just want to use custom rules. Send us the rules. We have no issues creating those rules for you so that you can we'll put them in a repository, you can clone it, do what you want with it, update it, and use it. So we certainly don't want to, it's not a complicated endeavor, I should say. So it's not a matter of needing to go through the painstaking process of learning some sort of proprietary language. Open Policy Agent is something that's extremely popular in the Kubernetes community, very large organizations, Netflix, Pinterest, are using Open Policy Agent to do evaluations. So, you know, we're right in line with our use and implementation of Open Policy Agent as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Ricardo. It does appear that you addressed her questions, so appreciate that.
Perfect. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about baselining. And this really gets into when we start looking at Basecamp 2 and Basecamp 3 a little bit more. But so when I talked about being able to tightly define an environment, this is one of these use cases where you could, for example, say, I need to create an environment where I'm really looking to protect specific assets. So this gets us out of just the compliance evaluation of certain resources. And this gets us to looking at specific configurations that we want to keep intact. So you can see this is also in US West. I've confined this to a specific region, a specific set of resources. So this number of scanned resources is way down. So you know, I've lowered the number of resources. I'm really only looking at my custom compliance family. So a couple of custom rules checks and a few best practices evaluation for these resources. So this is condensed considerably. I've also decided to enable baseline enforcement. So I've established a baseline, which is going to now tell me whenever there are changes in my infrastructure, but I'm also enforcing that baseline. This is obviously something that is done, you know, operationally. It's a process within an organization to do automated remediation, and we show this as an example as part of this demo, just as a capability. Our thought process is we want you to be able to use Fugue today, regardless of where you are in your cloud journey. At a minimum, to get information, to understand what your compliance posture, where you're vulnerable from a security perspective. But as you evolve and you get to a point, maybe it's a year from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, where you say, I have security groups, I have VPC configurations, and all of my S3 buckets that I need to stay configured the way that I've set them up. They are deployed, they're secure. This is the configuration that we want. At that point, you then establish a baseline. So a baseline is essentially telling Fugue based on, and it doesn't have to be the most recent scan, but in this case, when we click it here, based on my most recent scan, I want you to snapshot my resource configurations, and I want you to report on anything that changes. So any deviation in those configuration elements will trigger an event. Here we'll have a list of these events, which are modifications. So configuration changes that have been caught on and alerted to you by Fugue. The alert mechanism is through an SNS topic. So using Amazon Simple Notification Service, and by subscribing to that specific topic, you can actually send these notifications almost anywhere. Programmatically, if you decided to, you could kind of pull the detail through the API using SNS. You can subscribe to any sort of data collection endpoint and have those alerts sent directly. That includes Slack, that includes Teams, ServiceNow, Splunk, PagerDuty, OpsGenie, anything that you could think of, you can send that notification to that endpoint. What it looks like when that happens is you will get a drift alert, so a drift notification. And this is an example of a security group modification. I have 3 ingress ports on my security group. I don't want that to change. If there is a change, I need to be alerted to that. This is what you get in your notification. So you'll see the 3 ingress ports. You see that it was modified. Now there are 2 ingress ports. Looking, you can see instantly what the differentiated state is. Previously, I had port 3306 open to this specific CIDR block. If we look on this side, we see that's now closed. So I have a database connected, database access within this security group that is now shut down. So if I have a web application that needs to contact the database, it's not able to. So essentially, my application doesn't work. I can't do any reads. I can't do any writes to this database. So Fugue will alert you to that. The other side of that and the next level of that is being able to enforce that, to enforce your baseline. So in this case, you'll see that this was detected. I also have a remediation event. So there's two events that occur. One is just the drift event, then you will have a remediation event. And this is codeless. So there's no additional code that I've written. Fugue maintains the state of my environment, my configurations, and then I get a modification or a remediation report as well. So this is how it drifted. This is what was changed. This is my drifted resources, and this is the remediated resource attributes. So we'll see, again, the differentiation in that is that somebody shut down my database port. I now see this port is open again, back to the cider block as it was configured, and in 3306. So this is what remediation the reports will have. There are a number of use cases where customers will use just drift reports to glean information. One of the use cases that I highly encourage customers is to use it to capture changes in IAM. So changing permissions, elevating privileges, those are all sorts of things. Those are cloud native sorts of attacks and configuration attacks that we see often in the news. If you have the ability to traverse somebody's network using IAM role permissions, you can do some pretty nasty things. And those aren't the sorts of attacks that you see where somebody hacked into something. It's already somebody that's kind of inside your network and jumping around. So that is an absolute good, great use case for using the drift detection. Also, just knowing when things change. So when we think about even automating that process, being able to capture what those changes are within your environment and having a log of all those changes is invaluable. So when you are updating your environments, you capture whatever change. You can go back and review all of the changes to make sure that those were changes that you in fact wanted to happen. And then you just simply reestablish a baseline. So you can establish a baseline really at any time. And Fugue will report on any of those changes. And that really brings us to the ability to automate those sorts of things. So going back into our documentation and we look at our API user guide. So essentially all of the activities that we're performing within the UI are actually API accessible. There's some small exceptions like the export of the visualizer, even interacting with the visualizer, and some of the organizational controls, which are at an administrative level. We want to keep that tightly bound within the UI, but we are extending some of those activities to the API, but you can see whether it's creating environments, updating environments, changing resource types that are being evaluated, doing enforcement, you name it. It can all be done via the API. There is a Postman collection for those of you who do some API endpoint testing, where we will allow you, where you can download the collection and interact with the Fugue API there, as well as rules. So customers that are writing rules and want to check their API endpoints for that as well. But all of that detail is here. And I will stop there. I don't know, Drew, if there are any more questions, I can address those. But this is really, what I really wanted to, at least for this session, to give everyone a really high level understanding of the capabilities of Fugue. Obviously, there are some kind of deeper elements that we could get into, and that those are more use case specific. But certainly appreciate everybody's time, and the questions were phenomenal, and they're really great questions. If there are any more, please let me know.
Yeah, we got a couple, and I would also throw out too, if anybody would like to do a one-on-one session like this with Ricardo to kind of dig a little bit more into Fugue and how it can work for your specific unique cloud use cases, we'd be happy to set that up. So do reach out to us on that. So one question is how often does a scan run?
You can determine how often the scan runs, and I say that some of it does depend on the size of the environment. So generally, scans take anywhere between probably 3 and 10 minutes. So as a default, scans are set at 24-hour intervals. customers can update the scan interval to, I would say that the tightest scan interval that I have is about 6 minutes, and that's on that protected group, which is roughly a little under 100 resources, but really tightly managed. Other customers, we encourage customers, actually, anytime that you do a deployment, you trigger a scan, you could do it, 4 times a day, 10 times a day. There's really no limitation. You just want to make sure that the scan, obviously, if you have a very large environment and your scan takes 10 minutes, then you certainly don't want to set it at 8 minutes. There is intelligent triggers within the tool that scans will not trip over each other. So it will not start another scan until the previous one finished. But that is variable. That's another thing that our customers have told us about other tools, is just the inability to do on-demand scanning and evaluation. So that is something that Fugue is able to do.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's been helpful for me just to kind of think about this is that, you can have multiple Fugue environments that are associated with a single cloud environment on AWS or Azure. So you might have one that just captures the full cloud environment, runs once a day, and is basically focused on just kind of compliance reporting. And then you might have one that's very tightly focused on a handful of security critical resources, and that's doing drift detection. Maybe it's doing the self-healing kind of baseline enforcement to do automated remediation. And that might run, every half hour or something like that. And then you've got kind of the on-demand scans that can happen around deployments and that kind of a thing. So you can kind of, have different Fugue environments that have different sort of end goals, if you will. So
yeah, absolutely. And this is an example of that. So if you look, if anybody is looking intently, you'll see this same account ID, US West 2. And in my protected group, it's the same account ID, US West 2, and just a very small subset of those resources. So looking here at these. So this is going to capture any drift and actually auto remediate any of those things. I think I have a baseline turned on here. Yeah, it is established, but I don't have any enforcement. So I have basically collecting any changes that happen within the environment are still going to be collected. And this is going to collect any of those changes. So any like IAM changes, are even going to be caught. Actually, I think one of the examples that I had from earlier, yeah, here. So this is an example of a change in just the Fugue role that I'm using. So this example here is telling me what the permissions were for this specific Fugue role. I modified it to add enforcement capabilities for my S3 buckets. So Fugue is basically telling on Fugue. It really gives me the ability to track when any sort of change happens. So especially for a shared account that we have, another use case that I have set up is capturing all of the changes within IAM. So I have an IAM drift environment, which is really going to be, is going to tell me anytime there are modifications within IAM. So again, you see the policy, if there's a role change, policy attachments, users that get added. This is just, really an invaluable amount of detail, having a tool watch these sorts of things, users that are removed, users that get added, access keys added and removed. All of this sort of detail is detail that you really want to capture and be mindful of. And Fugue has the ability to do all of that.
Awesome. We do have a question about baselining and reporting on changes to Azure Active Directory, Microsoft Active Directory.
Yes. So Active Directory is actually being added. So we don't specifically, let me see if this has all of the different resource types. So if you're familiar with Azure, obviously the resource types, the way that it's set up is a little bit different. So Fugue actually incorporates So if you're using single sign-on for setting up your access to Fugue, so that's available to you, as well as multi-factor authentication. Some of the configurations in Active Directory are being established now. So we're actually going to be added this quarter, so that you'll be able to see some more of the details relating to Azure Active Directory. So that is actually a big addition for us, and you will see that, you know, within the next coming months.
That's great. I will throw out a last call for any final questions. All right, get those in, but otherwise, thank you. If you do have any questions outside of this, you know, please do reach out to us. You may already be communicating with somebody and they can help. You can send an email to hello@fugue.co with any questions. If you'd like to set up a one-on-one session with Ricardo, we would be happy to arrange that. And otherwise, we really appreciate your time.